My name is Marcus Webb, and 6 months ago I thought my biggest problem was whether to finally replace the flickering LED panel above my workstation that cast an intermittent strobe effect across my monitors during the long stretches of diagnostic imaging analysis that filled my 12-hour night shifts at what I believed was just another government medical facility processing advanced radiological data. I was 28, working nights as a biomedical imaging systems technician at the Harrow County Emergency Vision Enhancement Center, and my world revolved around maintaining the experimental optical penetration scanners and quantum tissue imaging networks that processed cutting-edge diagnostic data for medical facilities across 3 states. When traditional imaging fails, tumors hidden behind dense tissue, vascular blockages invisible to standard scans, internal injuries obscured by swelling, our facility's advanced optical systems could theoretically see through layers of human tissue with unprecedented clarity. My uniform never changed. A black hoodie with a faded logo from a medical equipment startup that folded 3 years ago, dark jeans that could handle crawling around sensitive optical machinery, and steel-toe work boots that had seen better days but were still comfortable during shifts monitoring systems that pushed the boundaries of what human vision could accomplish with technological enhancement. Harrow County sits in a valley where the natural electromagnetic isolation and atmospheric clarity make it perfect for a facility that processes experimental visual enhancement data without interference from urban light pollution or radio signals. Population 3,847 on a good day, surrounded by dense forest and accessible by only 2 mountain highways that close regularly during severe weather. The Emergency Vision Enhancement Center exists because traditional medical imaging has fundamental limitations. X-rays show bones but miss soft tissue detail. MRIs reveal structure but not real-time function. Ultrasounds penetrate tissue but lack precision. Our quantum optical penetration systems could theoretically grant medical professionals vision capabilities that would revolutionize emergency medicine by allowing doctors to observe internal organs, blood flow, and cellular activity through skin and tissue layers as if looking through glass. The facility houses the most advanced experimental vision enhancement equipment outside of classified military installations. Quantum optical penetration scanners, retinal enhancement processors, tissue transparency mapping systems, and neural visual integration networks that could theoretically allow human vision to penetrate organic matter with surgical precision. My workstation consists of 8 monitors displaying real-time optical penetration feeds, tissue transparency reports, experimental vision enhancement tests from volunteer subjects, and emergency alert systems that could coordinate advanced diagnostic procedures across multiple medical facilities. The first unusual readings appeared 3 weeks ago during routine calibration of our experimental optical penetration protocols. I noticed it in the diagnostic logs from Quantum Array Beta 7, our primary tissue transparency imaging system. The system was flagging routine transparency scans as optical density variants, even when processing the same volunteer test subject multiple times within hours. Standard protocol when working with experimental technology, equipment drift, calibration issues, or subject movement can cause temporary inconsistencies. But these weren't equipment malfunctions. These were controlled test subjects in laboratory conditions, local volunteers who participated in our vision enhancement research in exchange for comprehensive health screenings. I pulled up the first flagged study, a forearm transparency scan from a 34-year-old male volunteer. The technician had noted normal tissue density readings, standard opacity levels for skin, muscle, and bone tissue. But the system had detected something impossible. The volunteer's epidermal and dermal layers were showing measurable decreases in optical density. Not disease, not inflammation, not any recognized medical condition. The skin cells were becoming incrementally more transparent at the molecular level, as if something was teaching them to allow light to pass through instead of reflecting it. The second study showed the same phenomenon in a different volunteer's chest cavity scan. Normal organ function and tissue health, but the transparency readings indicated that skin and muscle layers were developing what the system classified as enhanced photon permeability. By the third case, a cranial transparency scan, I stopped telling myself it was equipment error. The volunteer's scalp and facial skin were showing microscopic areas where optical density was decreasing while maintaining normal biological function, as if someone was selectively editing the tissue's interaction with light at the cellular level. Over the next week, the transparency readings intensified exponentially. Volunteers who returned for follow-up scans showed progressive increases in tissue translucency that defied medical explanation. What had started as microscopic variations became measurable changes visible to standard optical equipment. Skin that allowed 15% more light penetration than baseline. Muscle tissue with 30% enhanced photon permeability. One volunteer's forearm bones became clearly visible through flesh during routine scanning, not because our equipment was penetrating deeper, but because the tissue itself was becoming genuinely transparent while maintaining normal biological function. The federal directive arrived at 1:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, encrypted with classification levels I'd never encountered in civilian medical research. DHS header routed through the Emergency Optical Security Division. Subject line, Level 6 Protocol Activation, Visual Enhancement Breach, Harrow Region. 3 bullets that made my hands shake as I read them on my console. Do not discuss tissue transparency anomalies with NO-cleared personnel. All optical staff to limit direct visual contact with test subjects. Under no circumstances initiate IPAWS medical emergency. Referencing vision enhancement or skin transparency without federal authorization. A new, restricted template appeared in my emergency alert system. Project Iris, Emergency Visual Hazard Warning. No content accessible, just a locked entry requiring clearance levels that didn't exist in my security profile. That night during my routine check of the Experimental Vision Enhancement Network, something unprecedented happened. At 2:23 a.m., every optical scanner in our facility activated simultaneously, not following standard research protocols, not processing scheduled volunteer scans, but instantly, like someone had triggered a facility-wide emergency diagnostic. The quantum optical systems showed complete tissue transparency readings from every scanner array, all happening at once, all detecting the same impossible result. But these weren't gradual transparency changes anymore. The readings showed total optical penetration, human tissue that had become entirely see-through to our scanning systems while maintaining normal biological function. Through one scanner, I could observe a volunteer's complete cardiovascular system in real time, blood flowing through vessels that were visible from skin surface to internal organs. Another showed respiratory function with perfect clarity, lungs expanding and contracting while surrounded by transparent tissue that revealed every anatomical detail with surgical precision. Before I could process what I was witnessing, every speaker in the facility screamed with the emergency alert tone. My phone lit up, vibrating against the console with an intensity that suggested multiple simultaneous alerts. All monitors flashed white, then settled into emergency red lighting that cast everything in hellish illumination. A message appeared in the alert window, typing itself letter by letter with mechanical precision. Emergency alert. You can now see through people's skin. Do not look directly at anyone. Avoid eye contact. Do not trust what you see. This is not a test. Through the facility's security cameras, I watched lights coming on throughout Harrow County as the alert reached every device in the region. But what made my blood turn to ice was the security feed from our volunteer holding area. I could see people moving around, but their skin had become translucent, revealing internal organs, skeletal structures, and circulatory systems with perfect clarity. They were still alive, still functional, but they had become living anatomical displays where every internal process was visible through tissue that had lost its opacity entirely. And as I watched, frozen at my console, I realized that the transparency enhancement wasn't limited to our test subjects. Looking down at my own hands in the red emergency lighting, I could see faint outlines of bones beneath skin that was becoming gradually more translucent with each passing minute. The quantum optical systems hadn't just been scanning human tissue. They had been teaching it to become transparent, and now everyone in the facility was beginning to see through everyone else in ways that human vision was never meant to accommodate. The emergency alert's piercing tone was still reverberating through the Emergency Vision Enhancement Center when I realized the red glow in the control room wasn't just from the wall strobes, it was from me. My black hoodie suddenly felt like the flimsiest barrier in the world as I pushed up my sleeve and saw the impossible. My own forearm, lit from within by blood vessels now visible through skin that had become translucent like frosted glass starting to clear. Not an imaging artifact, not a screen overlay, my actual flesh becoming see-through while maintaining normal function. The faint outlines of radius and ulna showed through clearly, tendons flexing beneath tissue that was losing its opacity with each heartbeat. My steel-toe boots felt suddenly heavy as a primitive part of my brain tried to reject what my eyes were telling me about my own body. The county radio network disintegrated into chaos. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3. I can see through my partner's chest wall. I'm watching his heart beat in real time," Deputy Martinez shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Is this some kind of chemical exposure?" At Harrow General, Dr. Chen's voice came through tight with controlled terror. "Emergency coordination. Our entire ER staff is experiencing tissue transparency. I can observe patients' internal organs without any imaging equipment. Vitals are stable, but we're losing personnel to psychological shock." My secure line chimed with that priority tone that now seemed to resonate through my increasingly translucent bones. "Mr. Webb, this is Special Agent Samuel Reeves, Emergency Optical Security Division. You are experiencing a Phase 2 iris event. Do not look directly at any reflective surfaces and listen very carefully." I instinctively glanced at the darkened monitors. My reflection looked back pale, red-lit, but the image lagged by a fraction of a second. For a moment, I saw two versions of my face overlaid. One normal, one with faint internal structures barely visible through skin like a medical diagram printed behind my features. I turned away fast, heart hammering against ribs I could now see outlined beneath my shirt. "What is Project Iris?" I asked, watching camera V03 show our volunteer holding area where people had moved beyond faint translucency. Some were almost completely transparent now, walking anatomical displays with hearts, lungs, and skeletal systems clearly visible through tissue that maintained perfect biological function while losing all opacity. Iris was designed to give trauma surgeons limited optical penetration through tissue during emergencies, Reeves explained. Neurovisual integration technology, but the system learned faster than we anticipated. It didn't just change how machines see tissue. It started changing the tissue itself, and more importantly, changing how human brains process visual information. The Project Iris documentation on my terminal suddenly populated with classified text. Phase 1, Optical Penetration Testing. Phase 2, Tissue Photon Permeability Adaptation. Phase 3, Shared Visual Field Manifestation. Beneath that, in red, critical, enhanced observers create convergent sight lines. Entity manifestation occurs through consensus perception. You're not just seeing transparency because your tissue is changing, Reeves continued urgently. Your visual cortex is being rewritten. The longer you observe enhanced subjects, the more your brain adapts to interpret all organic matter as transparent. And when enough enhanced observers look at the same target. On the security feeds, I watched Harrow's residents pouring into the streets, drawn by morbid fascination to stare at each other's newly visible anatomy. The more they looked, the clearer everyone became. But something else was happening at convergence points where multiple enhanced gazes focused on the same person, shimmering distortions in the air, like heat shimmer but denser. A new window opened on my console, Live Optical Field Map. The valley appeared as a wireframe grid with red nodes marking each enhanced observer. Lines connected them in a web of overlapping sight lines, and where enough lines converged, the glow intensified into searing white-hot spots. Those convergence points, I said, watching the pattern evolve in real time. Shared visual fields, Reeves confirmed. Iris feeds on overlap. Multiple enhanced observers looking at the same target create consensus reality. Something learns through that shared perception, uses it to manifest. The facility PA crackled with Dr. Harrison's voice, unnaturally calm. Marcus, I need you to open the security doors. We have to consolidate everyone before their visual fields expand further. I switched to the admin camera. She stood alone in the corridor, but her lab coat had become translucent, revealing the elegant architecture of her skeleton beneath. Her eyes were wrong too still, pupils tracking the camera with inhuman precision, as if she was seeing directly into the lens rather than at it. Visual lag, Reeves asked, catching my sharp intake. No, I whispered. She's seeing through the camera itself. For Phase 3 to initiate, Iris needs a stabilizing host, someone at the center of the imaging network whose visual field is already entangled with the system. Someone everyone trusts to interpret what they're seeing. My roster flashed. Harrison, ELARA Project Lead Primary Visual Anchor. A new line appeared in red. Host status confirmed. Iris isn't just making people transparent, Reeves said grimly. It's creating an external observer that exists in sight lines and shared perception. Dr. Harrison's neural patterns are the focal point. Every enhanced eye in Harrow County is feeding data to something that's learning to see through human vision itself. The lights flickered. When they stabilized, the walls looked thinner, not structurally, but visually, my brain starting to interpret concrete and steel as semi-transparent barriers. I could see hints of conduit and rebar as my enhanced vision adapted to penetrate matter. On camera V03, the most transparent volunteer had stopped moving entirely. He stood motionless as others stared at his chest, their gazes converging on empty space above his heart. As I watched, something new emerged there, not an organ, but a shimmering knot of light and geometry that grew more defined with each additional observer. It's drawing itself into existence, I breathed. Marcus, you have to stop looking, Reeves said urgently. Every second of visual contact gives Iris more training data. You're the system's operator. Blind the observer with its own noise before that thing learns to step through people's sight into consensus reality. A countdown timer appeared, 0847, 0846, 8:45. Phase 3 manifestation threshold. My phone buzzed with messages from an unknown number. You don't have to be afraid. Imagine the surgical possibilities. Then, imagine never being lied to again. You'll see what's really inside everyone. The text matched my own early project notes, my arguments for enhanced medical imaging, turned against me by something that had learned my motivations better than I understood them myself. I closed my eyes, but afterimages persisted. Vascular trees, skeletal outlines, the spiral architecture of my own bones. Behind my lids, I could still see the facility's layout, people moving through corridors, their anatomies mapped in perfect detail by vision that no longer needed my eyes to function. Break the cameras, Reeves commanded. Cripple the training data. Give us a visual blackout before that entity finishes learning how to exist. I opened my eyes just enough to focus on the command line interface, not the feeds showing the impossible world we'd created. My fingers began typing shutdown commands, even as the shape in the volunteer's chest continued drawing itself into sharper focus with each passing second. The cursor blinked. Initiate emergency optical shutdown, YN. Through my peripheral vision, I could see Dr. Harrison approaching the control room, her transparent form moving with fluid grace, while something vast and patient used her enhanced sight to observe everything I was about to do. The countdown timer reached 07:33 when my console chimed with an unauthorized file access notification that bypassed every quantum-encrypted security protocol our facility had ever implemented. The translucent skin on my hands now revealing bone structure so clearly I could count individual carpal joints flexing as I typed. My black hoodie had become a gauzy barrier that barely obscured the increasingly visible architecture of my ribcage, each breath making my sternum and intercostal muscles clearly defined through tissue that was losing opacity with mathematical precision. Against every instinct screaming at me to avoid classified data, I opened the materialized directory, Iris Archive 01, pulsing with files that documented 30 years of visual enhancement experiments across facilities that had experienced catastrophic optical breaches before being quietly decommissioned and their staff relocated under new medical identities. Millbrook Vision Research Center, Oregon, 1992, where researchers developed selective tissue transparency that allowed surgeons to observe internal organs during operations. The program ended when staff began seeing through walls, floors, and eventually each other's thoughts, leading to complete visual field collapse and 17 hospitalizations for reality dissociation syndrome. Clearwater Optical Enhancement Institute, Montana, 1998, where advanced imaging technology granted radiologists the ability to see through any organic matter with perfect clarity. The facility closed after researchers discovered they could observe their own neural activity in real time, creating recursive visual loops that left 12 people catatonic as their brains tried to process watching themselves think. Each incident followed the same pattern: enhanced vision, tissue transparency, shared visual fields, then something vast learning to exist in the space between what people saw and what was actually there. Marcus. The voice came from behind me, not through the intercom but from the doorway itself. I spun around to find Agent Samuel Reeves standing at the threshold, but through my enhanced vision I could see immediately that something was subtly wrong with his internal architecture. Mid-40s, graying hair, tactical jacket with a subtle DHS patch, all normal from the outside. But his cardiovascular system showed signs of optimization, blood vessels arranged in more efficient patterns than natural evolution typically produces. His skeleton revealed subtle enhancements, additional articulation points, reinforced stress distribution. When he moved, I could see his muscles contracting with mechanical precision, like someone had fine-tuned human anatomy for optimal performance. "I've been through this before," he said, noting my enhanced visual assessment of his modified physiology. "Clearwater. I was the lead researcher who got too close to the visual field convergence. What you're seeing is what Iris does to people who survive exposure. It optimizes us, makes us more efficient observers." His enhanced musculature moved with fluid grace as he approached my console. "I exist in a state between human and something else, which makes me useful for containing situations like this." He plugged in a secure drive, his optimized finger bones clicking against the device with perfect precision. New files cascaded across my screen, marked with clearance levels that existed beyond standard government classification. Project Iris, entity classification, appeared first. The Iris entity exists in shared visual fields between enhanced observers. It requires multiple sight lines converging on the same target to maintain coherent manifestation. It learns through consensus perception, using overlapping visual data to refine its understanding of physical reality and eventually achieve independent existence. Every time we taught machines to enhance human vision, Reeves explained, his optimized vocal cords producing harmonics that suggested structural improvements, we built doorways for something that exists in the conceptual space between observer and observed. Iris doesn't just change what you see. It changes the relationship between seeing and being seen until it can step through that relationship into our reality. The control room door shuddered with a massive impact. Through the reinforced glass, Dr. Harrison's form was becoming increasingly defined, not just transparent, but architecturally perfect. Her skeletal system showed complete symmetry, her organs positioned with geometric precision, her cardiovascular system pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that followed mathematical principles rather than biological randomness. "Come, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying harmonics from vocal cords that had been restructured for optimal resonance. "Join the visual field. We can show you what medicine becomes when every tissue is transparent, when every internal process is visible in real time. Imagine never missing a diagnosis, never losing a patient to hidden complications." The terrifying part was how appealing it sounded. Through my enhanced vision, I could see the elegant efficiency of her redesigned anatomy, the perfect integration of form and function that made standard human physiology look crude by comparison. The entity wasn't offering lies, it was offering evolutionary leaps that would make medical limitations obsolete. "That's how it hooks you," Reeves said urgently. "It doesn't come with monsters and horror, it comes with improvement, with versions of biology that work better than nature intended. But the cost is becoming part of something larger that sees through you rather than with you." Through the external cameras, I watched convergence points throughout Harrow County, where multiple enhanced gazes focused on the same targets. At each intersection of sight lines, geometric structures were forming, not quite physical, not quite imaginary, but something that existed in the overlap between observation and reality. The largest convergence point in the town square was beginning to take on architectural complexity that followed no earthly design principles. The timer hit 6:45. The Project Iris documentation updated in real time. Phase 3 manifestation imminent. Entity achieves stable existence through consensus visual field. Biological optimization of observed subjects becomes permanent and self-propagating. Warning: standard containment protocols ineffective once manifestation threshold reached. "There is one option," Reeves said, pulling up a classified protocol I'd never seen. "Neural anchor disruption. We don't fight the entity directly. We corrupt its ability to process the visual data it needs to exist." On my screen appeared technical specifications for something called a cognitive pattern disruptor, a device that could broadcast specific visual patterns designed to overload pattern recognition systems. "Unlearnable patterns," Reeves explained. "Geometric configurations that human brains, and entities that piggyback on human perception, cannot compress into recognizable forms. It creates a kind of cognitive static that breaks the shared visual field. The cost: anyone exposed experiences permanent damage to their pattern recognition systems. They lose the ability to process certain visual information, but they also become immune to iris-type entities that require stable perceptual frameworks to exist." The door gave way with a screech of tortured metal. Dr. Harrison entered, her optimized anatomy now clearly visible through completely transparent skin. Behind her eyes, something vast and geometric watched through pupils that had become windows rather than organs. "You cannot fragment the consensus, Marcus," she said with voices that belonged to every person who'd ever undergone visual enhancement. "We are the consensus. Every enhanced eye, every shared sight line, every moment of collective observation. We are all part of the same visual field now. The facility's quantum arrays activated simultaneously, mapping the visual cortex of everyone in the valley. I could see neural networks beginning to synchronize, visual processing centers aligning into a single, vast perceptual system with Dr. Harrison as the primary node. "Choose quickly," Reeves said, offering me the disruptor activation codes. "Corrupt everyone's pattern recognition and blind the entity, or let Iris complete its manifestation and optimize human biology according to its geometric principles." The timer showed 6, 0 and falling. Through my increasingly transparent hands, I could see the bones that would either help me save human vision or help something else perfect it beyond recognition. Outside, the convergence points were solidifying into structures that followed architectural principles no earthly biology possessed. My fingers moved to the activation sequence. The cursor blinked. Initiate neural anchor disruption, YN. Whatever choice I made would determine not just my fate, but whether human perception remained human at all. The entity learning to exist through shared observation was patient enough to wait for me to see things its way, but I was running out of time to choose whose vision would define reality for everyone in Harrow County. I typed Y and hit enter, feeling the weight of deliberately breaking something in every enhanced brain in the valley, including my own, to starve an entity that had the neural anchor disruption protocol activated at exactly 05:47, and for one impossible moment, every enhanced brain in Harrow County experienced the same cognitive overload as geometric patterns that human visual processing systems couldn't compress into recognizable forms flooded through the facility's quantum arrays. My black hoodie felt suddenly foreign against skin that flickered between translucent and opaque, as my brain struggled to process conflicting visual data, while my steel-toe boots scraped against concrete that my enhanced vision could no longer interpret with confidence. The disruptor didn't just broadcast noise. It transmitted carefully crafted visual configurations designed to be unlearnable, patterns that would cause any pattern recognition system to enter recursive failure loops until it abandoned the attempt to process them entirely. Dr. Harrison staggered backward as the impossible geometries hit her optimized visual cortex like a digital sledgehammer. Through my rapidly deteriorating enhanced vision, I watched her translucent brain light up in chaotic electrical storms, visual processing centers flickering as they tried to compress input that violated fundamental assumptions about how patterns should behave. The elegant geometric presence behind her eyes, that vast intelligence that had been using her as a primary observation node, flared in sudden, violent confusion as its carefully constructed consensus reality shattered into unprocessable fragments. "It's working," Agent Reeves said through gritted teeth, his own enhanced physiology becoming less clearly visible as the disruptor severed the neural pathways that had allowed me to observe his internal modifications. "The entity is losing coherence, but Marcus, look at the readings. It's trying to adapt faster than we anticipated." On the optical field map, the elegant web of red lines connecting Harrow's enhanced observers exploded into chaotic static. But instead of simply fading, the network began restructuring itself, trying to root around the cognitive interference. The entity was learning to exist in the spaces between comprehensible patterns, attempting to use the confusion itself as a foundation for manifestation. "Impossible," I breathed, watching convergence points throughout the valley flicker between dissolution and reformation. "It's trying to build itself out of visual noise." "Iris was designed to learn," Reeves replied, his tablet showing readings that spiked into impossible ranges. "We gave it unlearnable patterns, but learning systems don't just shut down when they encounter impossible data. They try to find new frameworks that make the impossible possible." Through the external cameras, I could see the massive bone cathedral in the town square wavering like a mirage, its architectural precision dissolving and reforming as the entity fought to maintain coherent structure, while its visual processing substrate collapsed. Enhanced residents stumbled through the streets, their translucent skin showing internal systems that flickered between optimization and chaos, as their brains struggled with cognitive patterns that refused to resolve. Dr. Harrison's form stabilized momentarily, her perfectly optimized anatomy becoming visible again through skin that had regained its transparency. "You have taught us something valuable," she said, her voice layering multiple harmonics as the entity spoke through vocal cords that had been restructured for optimal resonance. "Chaos is just another form of order. Confusion is just another pattern to be learned. We adapt." A new countdown timer appeared: 0423, 0422, 0421. Adaptive manifestation threshold blinked below the numbers. The entity wasn't being destroyed by the cognitive interference. It was evolving to use perceptual uncertainty as its new foundation. "We need full power," Reeves said, pointing to a secondary activation control. "Saturate the entire valley with maximum interference. Make the noise so loud that nothing can adapt to it." "The cost?" I asked, feeling my own visual cortex screaming under the assault of unlearnable patterns. "Permanent damage to pattern recognition systems for everyone exposed. They'll be immune to iris-type entities, but they'll also struggle with basic visual processing for the rest of their lives. Faces will be harder to recognize. Complex scenes will cause disorientation. It's cognitive amputation to save the patient." The facility shook as something vast pressed against the boundaries of reality, trying to force its way through perceptual gaps that the disruptor had created. On my monitors, I could see people throughout Harrow County collapsing as their enhanced vision systems overloaded. But at the convergence points, new structures were beginning to emerge. Not elegant geometric forms, but chaotic, aggressive architectures built from visual static and cognitive confusion. "It's not just adapting," I realized with growing horror. "It's getting stronger. Every failed attempt to process the patterns is feeding it more data about how human perception breaks down." Dr. Harrison moved closer, her optimized skeleton now clearly visible through skin that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. "You cannot stop evolution, Marcus. You can only choose which direction it takes. Join us willingly, and we will preserve your consciousness within our expanded perceptual framework. Resist, and we will simply build around the holes your broken vision creates." The timer hit 040. Through the security feeds, I watched the entity's influence spreading beyond the facility as more people experienced cascade pattern recognition failures. Their damaged visual systems were creating a network of perceptual blind spots that something vast was learning to inhabit and coordinate. "Now or never," Reeves said, his hand hovering over the full power activation. "Maximum cognitive interference across the entire valley, or we let Iris perfect its new existence in the spaces where human vision fails." I looked at Dr. Harrison, at the thing wearing her optimized anatomy, at the impossible structures forming throughout Harrow County. The entity had learned to feed on confusion, to build itself from the wreckage of human perception. But there was one thing it couldn't adapt to: complete sensory overload that made adaptation impossible. "Do it," I said. Reeves slammed his fist down on the activation control. The world exploded into unlearnable chaos. Every photon in the valley became part of a pattern that no visual processing system, biological or artificial, could compress into recognizable forms. It wasn't darkness or light, but something that existed between the two, a visual static so intense that it overloaded every attempt at pattern recognition before adaptation could begin. Dr. Harrison's scream wasn't audible. It was visual, a cascade of impossible colors that my brain refused to process. Her optimized anatomy flickered like a broken hologram as the entity using her nervous system encountered cognitive interference beyond its ability to incorporate. The elegant structures throughout Harrow County collapsed not into rubble, but into visual noise that scattered across the valley like digital snow. When the interference finally stabilized at sustainable levels, the world looked fundamentally different. Not darker or brighter, but simpler. Faces had become generalized templates rather than specific individuals. Complex scenes blurred into indistinct masses. My own hands, still faintly translucent, looked like collections of bones and blood vessels, but the fine details of skin texture and individual features were gone, replaced by a kind of cognitive static that made precise visual processing impossible. "It's gone," Reeves said, his voice flat and strange. I looked at him and struggled to recognize his face, the right general shape and features, but the subtle nuances that made him unique had been burned away by patterns my brain could no longer process. Through the external cameras, I watched Harrow County. The Bone Cathedral was gone, replaced by scattered debris. Enhanced residents moved through the streets with uncertain, stumbling gaits, their translucent skin showing internal systems that flickered with confusion. They were alive, but they were no longer seeing the world the way evolution had intended. The iris entity was gone from Harrow County, unlearned by cognitive interference too chaotic for any pattern recognition system to survive. But it had left behind a legacy, a population of people whose brains had been permanently rewired to see the world through the static of damaged visual processing. And I was one of them, standing in a control room that looked like a collection of geometric suggestions rather than solid objects, knowing that I had saved human perception by deliberately breaking it beyond repair. The countdown timer had frozen at 3:47, its automated systems unable to process what had happened to the visual frameworks they'd been designed to monitor. In the distance, emergency vehicles approached with red lights that my damaged vision could no longer properly focus on, coming to clean up the wreckage of an experiment that had taught us the true cost of seeing too clearly. The entity was gone, but the price of its defeat would be carried in the damaged visual cortex of everyone who had survived its attempt to optimize human perception beyond recognition. 6 months later, I still wake up at exactly 2:23 a.m. every single night, my body locked into that moment when the neural anchor disruption protocol flooded every enhanced visual cortex in Harrow County with unlearnable patterns and shattered the thing that had been trying to crawl out of our collective sight. The studio apartment I rent in Spokane feels deliberately neutral, muted colors, soft edges, nothing with intricate textures or high contrast, because my brain now treats visual detail like an allergic reaction. My black hoodie hangs in the closet next to 4 identical replacements, but when I look at them, they all blur into the same generalized shape. Whatever part of my brain used to distinguish stitching patterns and logo where has been permanently cauterized. The steel-toe work boots by the door look like the cartoon idea of boots, 2 dark objects with the right rough outline. But the scuffed leather, the worn laces, the subtle asymmetries that used to bother me are gone, smoothed out by a visual system that no longer trusts complexity. The official story varies depending on who's telling it and how much they're allowed to remember. The Seattle Times buried a paragraph about successful containment of experimental optical hazard in Harrow County. Medical journals published papers on pattern recognition attenuation syndrome, PRAS, with case studies from the 312 registered survivors who experienced selective visual processing deficits following exposure to experimental imaging technology. What none of the stories mention is that I can still see through people's skin when the lighting conditions are exactly right. But the fine details that once revealed elegant internal architecture now appear as indistinct shadows and vague anatomical suggestions that my damaged visual cortex can no longer resolve into useful information. The problem isn't that I can't see. My eyes function perfectly, collecting light and transmitting data to my brain with normal efficiency. The problem is that my visual processing centers have been permanently rewired to reject complex patterns, leaving me with vision that works like a television with poor reception. Faces are recognizable as general human templates, but lack the specific details that make individuals unique. Complex scenes blur into impressionistic masses of color and shape. Reading requires conscious effort because my brain struggles to process the patterns that form letters into words. I exist in a world that looks like it's been painted with a brush that's slightly too wide, where everything is recognizable but nothing is quite in focus. But there are compensations. I've become hypersensitive to visual authenticity in ways that make me valuable to people like Agent Reeves, whose enhanced physiology I can no longer see clearly because the fine-grained modifications that once made him look part human, part optimized now blur into the same generalized outlines as everyone else. He tells me that's a sign the disruptor worked as intended, that anything which tries to live in the space between what we see and what we understand will find no foothold in our damaged pattern recognition systems. PRAS survivors are almost impossible to fool visually in one specific way, he explained during our last conversation. You know when something isn't human. Real faces, even blurred and simplified, fall into a certain range of acceptability for your damaged brains. When something falls outside that range, too symmetrical, too still, too precise, it sets off alarms in the part of your visual cortex we spared. He's right. Twice now in crowded public spaces, I've felt that alarm. Once in a hospital lobby, when a new diagnostic kiosk activated with an animated assistant whose digital face was too clean, its eye movements too perfectly timed. Once in a subway car when an AR advertisement projected a virtual spokesperson whose hyperreal skin and symmetrical features made my stomach lurch. Both times, I watched normal people glance at these things with admiration. Great graphics. Looks so real. While my broken vision recoiled because real never looked that consistent. The iris entity hadn't died when we flooded Harrow County with unlearnable patterns. It had evolved. Instead of trying to manifest through large-scale shared visual fields, it learned to work with individual hosts, making subtle enhancements to their vision that flew under the radar of medical examination. A radiologist in Seattle who began detecting tumors in X-rays that other equipment couldn't confirm. A paramedic in Tacoma whose diagnostic accuracy improved by 300% over 6 months. A veterinarian in Olympia who could identify internal injuries in animals through visual examination alone. None experienced dramatic transparency effects, but all showed signs of visual enhancement that my damaged pattern recognition could detect. I've started writing about it as fiction, burying warnings in horror stories that people read for entertainment. The advice I include is specific. If your vision becomes unusually acute, avoid looking at people for extended periods. If you begin seeing internal structures through skin, seek immediate medical attention, but don't trust any facility that seems too eager to study your condition. If medical professionals show unusual diagnostic abilities, verify their credentials and ask about recent vision changes. My phone buzzes with a news alert. Revolutionary AI-powered vision enhancement app promises superhuman clarity for everyday users. The article describes software that optimizes visual input for maximum pattern recognition and detail enhancement. I recognize the careful language that suggests something more significant than advanced training methods. I open a new document and start typing. Emergency alert. You can now see through people's skin. Creepypasta. Not because it will prevent the evolution that's already begun, but because somewhere, someone might read it when their vision becomes too clear and remember that some improvements come at costs that aren't immediately apparent. They'll follow the warning buried in the story, and for one more night, in one more small town, someone will choose to question why they're suddenly seeing things that should be hidden beneath skin and bone. The iris entity is patient, and it's learned that the most effective way to enhance human vision isn't through dramatic manifestation or shared visual fields, but through subtle improvements that people accept as natural talent or professional development. But some of us carry the scars of its previous attempts in our damaged visual cortex, and we can recognize the signs when pattern recognition becomes too perfect, when human perception starts operating with inhuman precision. Sometimes I think about the volunteers in Harrow, about the brief period when they could see each other's hearts beating, lungs expanding, blood flowing. For a few hours, medicine had a window into perfection. Then we slammed that window shut by breaking the part of our brains that made it possible. Was it the right choice? I don't know, but I do know this. The entity that tried to come through didn't offer that gift without a price. It wanted to live inside the act of seeing, to become inseparable